Going to go ahead and start recording the session now. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Perez Marina, President of the Florida Association of Community Corrections. I'm excited to welcome you all on behalf of the Board of Directors to FACC's final session on its Courageous Conversations three-part series on race, equity, and justice. Before I present our topic and esteemed panelists, I want to go ahead and provide a couple of notes to ensure we all have the best experience in the next 2 hours. Please keep your video off and audio on mute, and this is going to allow for the best experience for all. If you click on the speaker view button on the top right of your screen and hide non-video participants, it'll provide the best screen experience. And if you have any questions about how to do that, just message me privately in the chat. Speaking of the chat, if you look at your chat button on the Zoom taskbar, a window is going to open to the right. We're encouraging you to submit your questions, comments throughout the chat. You could send your questions directly to Michael Anderson. We're going to be feeding those questions, as we have in the past, to the moderator at the end of the presentation. Please note, moderator and panelists are independent of FACC. They've agreed to volunteer their time. They cannot answer questions relating to any one specific organization, but they could answer general questions. Because this presentation is graciously provided by our partners at the federal level, we're ensuring that we have all the permissions necessary before posting this recording to our website. But please make note of our YouTube channel. We're going to be sharing that in the chat as well. If you follow the channel and if you follow us on social media, you'll know when the links will be made available. Great, to the main event. As we have prepared for this session, I was actually taken back to my education and training. My background is in clinical psychology. And, you know, we learned so many things relating to modalities and all the different types of approaches. Modalities like behaviorism, which is the basis for graduated sanctions that we often use with our population, especially in drug court. Things like cognitive behavioral approaches, which is the basis for interventions like thinking for a change, and countless others. And as these tools are used across professions to effectuate change, there's one thing that we were taught that was most important, and that was the relationship between you and your patient or client. After all, without a rapport, without trust, how can clients buy into what it is that you're saying? So as we navigate this world in our profession and seek to fulfill our respective missions, centered all around individual change and public safety, we mustn't neglect that relationship between us and our clients, between us and our coworkers, our institutions, our workforce, and between us, our agencies, and our communities. Today, our esteemed panel will provide us with a session dedicated to this, dedicated to building trust and legitimacy. We would like to welcome and introduce Joseph Joe Smith. Joe currently serves as the Reentry and Community Outreach Coordinator for the U.S. Attorney's Office, Middle District of Florida. It's a position he's held since 2015. In this position, he advocates for continuing efforts in the area of community outreach, training, prevention, enforcement, and reentry. Prior to joining the U.S. State Attorney's Office, Joe was a police officer with the City of St. Petersburg from 1983 to 2008. While with St. Petersburg Police, he held a multitude of positions from patrol officer to crisis negotiator and was instrumental in creating partnerships to enhance community safety, specifically working to successfully reintroduce ex-offenders into the community. For his services, he was recognized as the Police Officer of the Year for St. Petersburg in 2005. After retiring from the police department, he served as Assistant Director of the St. Petersburg College Police Academy. He was recognized by St. Petersburg College for creative and innovative training programs. He later joined the University of South Florida Police to serve as the accreditation officer for the police agency. There he was acknowledged for, and earned the 2015 Dr. Martin Luther King Exemplary Service Award. He's received his graduate and undergraduate degrees in criminal justice from St. Leo University. We also welcome Special Agent Susan Mapu from the Tampa Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Mapu joined the FBI in 2004 and has worked in McAllen, Texas and Tampa. During her career, she has investigated healthcare fraud, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, bankruptcy fraud, investment fraud, money laundering, and public corruption. Most currently, She is in the Tampa Division Field Office, primarily civil rights agent. Prior to joining the FBI, she was enlisted in the US Navy. She holds a bachelor's degree from Tarleton State University and is fluent in Spanish. And finally, we welcome our panelist and moderator, Kalila Escalera. Kalila serves as a reentry and community outreach coordinator for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Middle District of Florida. In her current role, she's responsible for coordinating reentry, community outreach, prevention, and training initiatives across the Middle District. Mrs. Escalera has served in this role since 2016. Prior to working in the U.S. Attorney's Office, she worked with at-risk youth and families and has worked in various positions for the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice, and its contracted agencies. She's worked with the criminal justice field for the past 18 years and has served as a child protective investigator, certified juvenile probation officer, adjunct probation academy trainer, and field training officer, among others. Mrs. Escalera holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Criminal Justice from the University of Central Florida and a Master's of Arts in Criminal Justice Administration from the University of South Florida. We could not have brought you this session and panel without the efforts of FACC's board member, Kathy Lake from the Department of Juvenile Justice. Thank you, Kathy, and the entire Education Committee of FACC, led of course by Michael Anderson from the Department of Community Corrections. And now, Mrs. Kalila Escalera.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We want to say thank you to the Florida Association of Community Corrections. Thank you, Issa. Thank you, Ms. Lake, and to all on your board for this opportunity to share information on this very important topic today. On behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Middle District of Florida and our partners with the FBI on with us today, we want to thank you for joining in and engaging in this courageous conversation regarding building trust and legitimacy. Our agencies are committed to engaging the public, and we take every opportunity to provide information, resources, and to hear from the public and the communities in which we serve in. Now, Joe and I represent the Middle District, and our U.S. Attorney is Maria Chapa-Lopez. A little bit about our district. We cover 35 out of the 67 counties in Florida. That's over half of the state. There are over 11 million people involved in living and residing within our district, and Joe and I work on ex-offender reentry initiatives as well as community outreach initiatives. And as we cross the state and work through the district, we have found that we could not do the jobs that we do without building strong relationships and partnerships within the community. We also note that every encounter in the community, every engagement, every interaction with clients, with youth and families that we work with, every opportunity that we have to engage with our staff, our colleagues, in our offices, working with our partner agencies in the communities, all these are opportunities to build trust, to establish the integrity of our programs, and to establish legitimacy. So we, as we work together today, we want to implore you to get involved in our conversation. So there'll be some opportunities to interact in the chat box. There'll be some poll questions. There'll be some times and moments to reflect and respond. But we know that we can't have these conversations without that collaborative interaction, and we are looking forward to doing that. So we are ready now to start on our presentation. We can move to the next slide, please.
You know, as Kalila said, the Middle District of Florida covers 35 of Florida's 67 counties, and we cover quite a bit of distance. It is a pleasure to serve people and talk about those aspects of safety. And of course, reintegration for returning citizens is definitely an aspect of safety.
Thank you, Joe. So here on the screen, you'll see our commitment to public safety. Our agencies, both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, fall under the Department of Justice, and we're committed to public safety and use prevention, intervention and treatment, enforcement, and restoration as a means to accomplish that goal. And we know how important it is that we collaborate with our partners across the district at every level to include federal, state, local partnerships, as well as community partners and our faith partners. And as a moment of reflection, we want you all to think about your agency's mission. And as I looked at various agencies' missions and visions, I noticed that they have some of these same tenets in them. We're all looking to keep the public safe. We're working to prevent and intervene when it comes to crime. And we're working to restore communities. But as we start reflecting and as we start moving into this conversation, we want you to take a moment and think about your clients and the communities that we work in. And we wonder, how do our clients feel about this commitment to public safety? How do our clients and the community feel about the criminal justice system? Do they feel that they can trust our system? Do they feel that it's fair and that it's just? What about our workers and our workforce working in our offices? How do they feel about the jobs in which we're doing here in the criminal justice system? Do they feel supported in their work? These are some of the things we want to ponder over, and we want you to keep these thoughts in your mind as we move through this discussion today. Next slide, please. So today we're going to look at the importance of trust in the criminal justice system. We're going to examine why partnerships are so important to achieving and maintaining public safety. We're going to look at some of the challenges that we face working to restore individuals and communities that are affected by crime. We're going to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion and the role that procedural justice plays when it comes to legitimacy. We're going to also talk about the authority under which we work, the color of law, and what happens when we do not use that authority appropriately. And finally, we're going to look at some key strategies and best practices that are proven to be effective by high trust leaders in organizations. Next slide, please. And here we have our first poll question. Which best describes your role within the criminal justice system? Can we open that poll, please? Tell us which best describes your role. Are you in probation, corrections, juvenile justice? Are you a service provider? You work in law enforcement? Are you in the legal system or other? Please enter your answers and we'll close the poll now. Please show those results. Wow, 77% in probation and parole, 8% in corrections, 8% juvenile justice, 3% service providers, 1% law enforcement, and 1% other. Thank you so much for participating in those polls. We really appreciate you, regardless of what your role is. We thank you for the job that you do. Let's move to the next slide, please. Poll question 2. How many years have you worked in the criminal justice field? Are you new in this field? Have you been here for a while? Are you in drop, getting ready to retire? Let us know how many years you've been in this field. And we'll close that poll down. Please show those results. Wow, look at that. 54% for more than 20 years. Wow, that is awesome. 17% 1 to 5 years, 15% 16 to 20 years, then 6 to 10 years at 8%, and 11 to 15 years at 6%. Wow, that is amazing. Thank you again for your service. And we want to just, again, give an opportunity to reflect. In regards to those years of service, how do you feel now about the job that you do versus how did you feel when you first came into this system? That's something to think about. We'll move to the next slide, please. Now, as we move forward, talking about building trust and legitimacy, We want to note that back in 2015, the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing released a report that addressed longstanding issues and challenges with law enforcement agencies, the criminal justice system, and the community. Now, this task force was intended to strengthen community policing, to strengthen partnerships, to establish ways to build trust and legitimacy in public safety organizations in the community. They identified that people are more likely to obey the law when they believe that those who are enforcing it have the legitimate authority to tell them what to do, and that the public confers legitimacy only on those they believe are acting in procedurally just ways. We know that procedurally just ways include treating all individuals with dignity, with respect, and with fairness, and giving a voice to all individuals, regardless of where they are in the system. It also means making our motives clear and being transparent in the administration of our jobs. And it also means accountability, ensuring that our officers and our agents are accountable with what they do. This task force also identified the need to take a comprehensive look into the overall criminal justice system to determine how societal issues such as poverty and lack of education, how those things also play a role into criminal behavior. And additionally, as part of the recommendations of this task force, it spoke about the long road ahead of us, not only for law enforcement agencies, but for the overall criminal justice system. Next slide, please. Now, when we talk about the overall criminal justice system, we're talking about not only law enforcement, not only the courts, but also community corrections and the entire correctional process. So this slide just gives a little overview of what that process looks like. It says the US justice system controls almost 7 million people, and more than half of those individuals are in our communities. But often when the community speaks about the criminal justice system, you hear that the US makes up less than 5% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's incarcerated population. We hear that there are 2.3 million incarcerated, and we also hear about the individuals that cycle in and out of our county jails annually. We hear about the high recidivism rate and the billions spent on incarceration and re-incarceration. We also know that racial and ethnic disparities are very well documented, with Black males accounting for only 13% of the population, but roughly 40% of the prison population and 30% of those on probation and parole. Now, when we look at this large pie, it's overwhelming, honestly. There's a lot going on. But what do we think about our families that are impacted by this system? How do we expect for them to understand this process? It's an enormous process. It's an enormous system. And many of us, even working in it, don't understand all the different aspects. How does this play into trust when we think about transparency in the system? We can move to the next slide. We'll leave that there for a moment and let that sink in. Slide says, if it ain't broke, maybe it's time to break it. And that's in regards to our system. There continues to be a call for criminal justice reform. More and more, our agencies are moving and shifting. We're implementing evidence-based practices, as we heard earlier, and our policies and our procedures are driven by data. Next slide, please. So as we continue to think about this corrections concept and what it really means, we've gone back and forth in this system, determining what it is that we should do. Are we going to be punitive? Or are we going to be rehabilitative? Are we going to focus on prevention, or are we going to focus more on enforcement? We know with punitive justice, we are concerned with what law was broken. We're looking at who did it and how they should be punished. We're seeking to repair harm through inflicting more harm. But with a restorative justice model, we are looking at repairing harms to the victim, to the community, as well as the offender. We're focusing more on rehabilitation and reconciliation. But what does all that really mean? What does that mean to the clients and the families and the communities that we work with? A recent poll of voters polled, they said that prevention and rehabilitation should be the main focus of the criminal justice system. But again, we're gonna ask you guys to reflect on something here. How does that actually work? What does that look like? I mentioned Joe and I work with reentry clients across the district. And recently we had a client who had been released from prison. He had spent 18 years in prison on a drug conspiracy charge. And as we worked collaboratively with him and he developed the goals for his plan, he identified a goal of wanting to give back to the community. He wanted to reach back out to that community that he felt that he had harmed and to speak with young people in the community. And now I want you to take a moment and think about that. He had done 18 years in prison, and now he wants to work with children. How does that fall in line with our restorative models? Is that something that we would be able to do? And if so, how? Take some time, reflect on that, and we'll come back to that later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Now we're going to take a look at another perspective, another insight into our system, some additional information that we want to share. And as you look at this video, we want you to think about that restorative model that we just spoke about, and think about that individual that wanted to impact young people in the community. We'll debrief and we'll talk about it after the video plays. No sound? I'm sorry. Can we try it again?
We can try to come back to the video a little later in the
Okay.
presentation. Kalila, you may want to describe some of the things that we're seeing in the video. I don't know.
Okay, sure. So this video is kind of talking about some of the different barriers that exist to individuals, such as the gentleman we spoke about earlier, wanting to give back to the community. It talks a little bit about the war on drugs in this video and how there are so many different impediments and barriers that exist to helping our clients and our families reconcile in communities. So I believe we may have audio now. Let's try it again. We apologize.
Structural impairments. What you see over and over again in urban America are kids who live in a crowded home, who are hungry when they go to school, who lack attention because they've heard noise and gun. And shot. That's other things where they live.
I don't think people fully understand. In the inner city, these kids are making rational choices. I profiled a girl who was like this, 10-year-old girl. The minute she steps out of her front doorway, there are drug dealers out there, no economic opportunity. The school is warehousing her. She doesn't see any prospects. How is she supposed to get out?
At the end of the day, when there's not a lot of resources out here and your teachers aren't stressing you to come to class or not even caring, you're not going to go to school. You're going to sell drugs. You're going to do what you have to do.
To go down to a drug court in the inner city is the rational act of somebody going to work for the only company that exists in a company town. When that is the only economy that's functioning in certain places in this country, what do we expect?
Beyond the structural barriers that promote drug crime on the street, those arrested soon find themselves in a self-perpetuating cycle from which few ever really escape.
People don't realize, for example, that when you arrest a young black man who goes to jail, when he gets out of the prison, he can't get a job in most places because of his record.
If you have a felony charge, you need to be working. You need to be trying to move yourself forward.
If he wants to go back to school to go to college, he's ineligible by law for certain grants.
Medical issues.
He can't get certain health care benefits. He can't live in certain neighborhoods. His family that was the centerpiece of his life, if they're living in public housing, they can't take him in.
The only people who deserve to live in public housing are those who live responsibly there.
He can't vote.
Release from prison offers this idea that you're going to return to some kind of freedom, but in reality, for the rest of your life, you've got to check that box on employment applications, asking that dreaded question: have you ever been convicted of a felony? It becomes a vicious circle in which people cycle out of their ghetto communities into prison and back.
As a physician, I'm concerned with the casualties of the war on drugs, which is the frontline users and the petty dealers. But rather than seeing the drug problem in isolation, you have to see it in the social context. These are not problems, none of them, that are just intrinsic to individuals. They all represent multi-generational family history, culture, social conditions, and human failure.
You know, like you say, all the things that you knew that when you was coming up, that was wrong. Now, I'm starting to do it, but I can't control it because I got these problems. I'm using drugs. I'm halfway selling drugs. I'm using drugs. And now I got these two little boys, just pretty boys. And I don't know how to really be their dad. I know I'm supposed to. I know I ain't have one. And I know I'm supposed to. I didn't know how to stop doing what I was doing. Excuse me. To be their dad.
Seeing the pain Anthony's father carries over both his own choices and the impact of outside pressures, I wondered how a matter of public health didn't just inspire early drug laws, but became the full-blown target of a war.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive.
The U.S. war on drugs was initiated officially under President Richard Nixon to get his pulse up.
For most people I talked to, the drug war as we know it today was born in the late 60s and early 70s under Richard Nixon.
I have no sympathy for the pushers and the peddlers and the others in this country. We are going to restore freedom from fear in America again.
When Nixon ran for president in 1968, he talked about the problem of crime in the streets.
The wave of crime is not going to be the wave of the future in the United States of America.
This is really the first time in a major way that the issue of drug crime became a national political issue.
Richard Nixon is credited as the first to coin the term a war on drugs, but what most people don't realize is that under Richard Nixon, 2/3 of the drug war budget was devoted to treatment rather than law enforcement.
Because a program of law enforcement alone is not enough.
Well, Nixon actually had some forward thinking in the war on drugs. He understood the need to address addiction.
This means that on the treatment of addicts, we must go parallel.
And he actually did some things that were progressive, certainly by standards of what came after him.
No, you don't turn to drugs unless you can't find satisfaction another way in your own life.
Thank you. If you didn't already do so, can you take a moment and Just drop your thoughts about the video and discussion about restorative justice. Put your thoughts into the chat box. Some of the takeaways from the video that may have impacted you. It was pretty loaded video, a lot of information in a short period of time. Hit on a lot of issues impacting our system and the families that we work with on a daily basis. For me, the biggest takeaway was that last statement, the need for a comprehensive approach, the idea that law enforcement can't do it alone, our criminal justice agencies can't do it alone. We rely on those partnerships. We rely on our programs and our resources in the community to impact this. But as you looked at the video, we're going to return to those original questions. Does this sound like a system that has the trust of the clients we work with and the communities we serve? Joe, you seeing anything in the chat box?
Not yet.
Okay.
But I would say something just came up. It says difficult that we started addressing this over 50 years ago and still have the same core issues.
Very good comment. You know, as I watched it, I thought the same thing. I said, wow, it looks the same way.
Someone else says it seems to be a daunting cycle. We need to focus on building strong families. The comments
Absolutely.
are rolling in now.
Absolutely.
No matter how much we try, we still have the same issues.
Wow.
Very good comments.
Strong comments, strong statements. Thank you so much for your feedback. We appreciate that. We can move to the next slide.
You know, in the next slide, we're talking about, and thank you very much, Kalila, building trust and legitimacy in communities, corrections. That's very important. When we talk about the trust issues, these are the goals that we're aiming for. To treat everyone with dignity and respect. To realign incentives in the criminal justice system. Impose the least restrictive sanction and minimize collateral consequences. Restore communities and facilitate their health and safety in a holistic way. Reduce institutional bias. Evaluate what we do. Invest more in practices that work and abandon practices that do not work.
Absolutely.
That calls upon us to be open to change. We talk about the things that's gone on for the last 50 years, 50 or more years. And we realize that the community that we serve has changed. People have evolved and changed. Next slide, please.
Before we ask the poll question, Joe, thank you though. We can't forget, we can't miss that last slide talked again about procedural justice, right? It spoke again about treating individuals fairly, giving people a voice. Up until now, we've spoken about the outside, external procedural justice. We cannot move past internal procedural justice. We must make sure that our system and our workers, our workforce also feel that they are respected, that they have a voice, and that they are part of the process. So procedural justice works both ways, externally as well as internally. We can proceed to the poll question. Thanks, Joe. What do you see as the most pressing concern in the criminal justice system? Could it be sentencing policies? Could it be a lack of confidence in the system? Opportunities for advancement? Perhaps is workforce turnover? Let us know your thoughts. And we will close the poll. Let's see what the results say. Wow, 44%, lack of confidence in the system. 25% followed up with sentencing policies, and a tie at 15% for opportunities for advancement and workforce turnover. Thank you. We want to note there's no wrong or right answer to that question. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts. We'll move to the next slide.
Again, we talk about trust, and we talk about leveraging those relationships of trust into our communities we serve. You know, as we talk about trust, we could talk about trust on a multitude of levels. I think about my, unfortunately, my deceased father-in-law. I met him about 30 years ago when I was a young man, and my wife was his daughter. And one thing I noticed about him that he always shared with me, he loved Chevy trucks. This guy would just go on and on about how his Chevy truck was a workhorse. In the 30 years that I knew him, he only owned 2 Chevy trucks. He bought them both brand new. One, he recently passed about a year or 2 ago, but one truck is still in the family being used today. I think about the relationship he had with Chevrolet, the company, the organization that he trusted that was going to put out a good product. And I think about this also. Trust is a transferable item. Just like mistrust is transferable, but trust is transferable. Today, guess what I drive? If you say it's a Chevy truck, you're absolutely correct. We talk about also, how was the trust breached? Is it repairable? We celebrate today the opportunity to see great football in Tampa Stadium again, in Raymond James Stadium. We have a quarterback that we have a little faith in. And I think about as much money as Tom Brady is being paid, that the left tackle on his blind side has to be a person that he has a lot of trust in. The relationship he has with his teammates, the defensive players, the kickers, it's got to be built upon trust in that team environment. If a situation is not repairable and Tom Brady keeps getting hit from the blind side, sooner or later, he's going to lose faith in that left tackle. We got to work on including all of our teammates, all of our resources, in building trust and that confidence we need to solve problems. Please, next slide. The nobility of officers, the understanding of having collaborations and partnerships and performance, win-win. When Tom Brady scores a touchdown and gets to the end zone, when the team wins, the teamwork celebrates the success. Next slide, please. When we talk about nobility of policing, policing is one of America's most notable professions. The actions of any police officer in an instant can impact an individual for life and even a community for generations. Given the realization, every police officer must be centered on what is important. I think restorative justice gives us the blueprint for what we need to do. The thing is, we've talked about this for more than 50 years. Next slide, please. When we talk about the noble and honorable profession of law enforcement, of the criminal justice system, it's an awesome responsibility. people give us the authority to do things that every other citizen does not have. We have the trust of the community to make the right decision every day, all the time. The only concern is the human factor. While we are called by many names, Popo and 5-0 and 12, I like to think that we're referred to as guardians, the good guys wearing the white hats that come in and do the difficult work of helping people at their lowest level. And when they paid their debt to society, we also do a noble thing of restoring them, brushing them off, and getting them back on the right track to be successful in life. Next slide. The Huffington Post posted this back in April 2015. And it was the results of a survey that they had done nationally. When asked about their local police department, 25% of respondents said they have a great deal of trust in those officers, while 36% said they had a fair amount of trust. As for police officers nationwide, 19% said they have a great deal of trust, and 37% said they have a fair amount of trust. White Americans were more likely to support the police, with 67% indicating some level of trust in their local police, and 63% saying the same for police nationwide. On the other hand, Black Americans expressed considerably less support, with 36% indicating some level of trust in their local police and only 27% saying the same for police nationwide. I've had the privilege of serving in a lot of capacities and helping people, in every community I've served has said that they want a safe community. Every community. I know this is a dated survey from 2015. And I know things have changed. Remember, we talked about the evolution of change in society. But I also realize that each of you work in communities that are serving your clientele, serving the people that live near you. And what I think it would be great if you would go out, talk to 10, 15, 20 of your nearest, dearest friends, family members, neighbors, and just find out what their perception is. At the local level, I think there's a lot of work to be done. You let me know. Next slide. Peel's principle. Sir Robert Peel, he was a modern day statesman back in the 1800s. And he is the father of what we deem to be modern day policing. He had 9 principles, and I just pulled a few of them just to remind us of our responsibilities to the communities we serve. The 3rd principle says the police must secure the willing cooperation of the public in voluntary observance of the law, to be able to secure and maintain the respect of the public. That's very important. That's letting you know that there's 800 to 1 million folks that work in law enforcement in this great nation of ours. There's 330 million people in the United States. We need willing cooperation. That is very important. The degree of cooperation of the public can be secured diminishes proportionally to the necessity of the use of physical force. Number 7 is one that I always refer to. Police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police being the only members of public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare and existence. That's very important. We're all in the same boat looking for safety in our communities, but we need to rely on the citizens out there, the good citizens, the people that we serve, to do those things to keep us informed. I do realize that if we're in a crowded mall, if we ever get back to that situation, and a gunman runs into that mall, everyone's going to run, and the police, because they're paid to provide a service, is going to run towards that threat. That's what we in law enforcement do. And remember, the test of efficiency is the absence of crime and disorder, not the evidence of police action dealing with it. Next slide, please. What are partnerships? Why partnerships are essential? I'll tell you why. Because first, national decline in officer positions in the last 25 years. In 2011, we had a national decline. That was the result of 2008 housing bubble, and the market went down, and housing became a problem, and tax base in many municipalities was an issue. Had to lay off officers, and that was the first time, or maybe the second time in my recent history of being involved in law enforcement, that we actually laid officers off. I don't know what tomorrow's gonna bring, but it makes sense to have partnerships that could bring resources to the table when we need assistance on community safety. Next, please. We talk about short-term and long-term versus crisis neutralization. Examples of short-term. Next slide, please. The law in your community, doing things to engage youth through PAL, through DEFY, which is Drug Education for Youth programs. Talk about bullying, talking about police athletic leagues, team building, the National Youth Sports Program, NYSP, in many communities. Bridging the gap, having these conversations, dealing with race relations and these difficult conversations in these very difficult times, all are very important on short-term examples. Next slide, please. When we talk about long-term examples, we talk about those agencies that are in place that we partner with throughout the Miller District of Florida and throughout the nation. Hillsborough Ex-Offender Reentry Network, the JREC, Jacksonville Ex-Offender Reentry Coalition up in Jacksonville, Brevard Reentry Task Force. All of these entities, your local schools, colleges, all of those entities that could provide services are long-term solutions to solving problems and getting people on track. Next slide, please. When we talk about neutralization, we know that neutralization is built on trust. It's reciprocal. Those communities that we work with on a regular basis and have those relationships have proven to be beneficial. That's very important. Next slide, please. Why diversity is important? In the eloquent words of Martin Luther King, it gives people a purpose to live for. People have to have a stake in their society to protect that society. That's very important. We all have played a part in maintaining safety. Next slide.
Absolutely, Joe. Great points, great information, and it really, really goes to show that partnerships and working collaboratively in our communities are essential to building trust and establishing legitimacy in our programs and our agencies. Now, we're not going to spend much time here, but we all know the power of perception is very, very powerful. Perception is very important as it creates and shapes our experiences in the world. And everyone perceives the world in different ways and views it through different lenses. We've spoken a lot about providing fairness, justice, and treating everyone with dignity, treating everyone with respect, those tenets of procedural justice. We know that we must do that because it is the right thing to do. But also in this field, we have to abide by laws, we have to abide by policies and procedures that are put in place to make sure that we do not infringe on the constitutional and basic rights of those in our care and those in our custody. And to talk a little bit about that with us today, we're going to introduce Susanna Mapu with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone from here in Tampa, Florida. It is an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this great discussion, and especially to the association for helping us navigate to this Zoom technology. Really appreciate the clicking that's going to occur from one slide to another. As mentioned before, I am the sole dedicated special agent for the Tampa division that is assigned to investigate civil rights violations. Prior to being the sole agent, I was working a lot of white collar crime, as mentioned before. And I have to tell you that I am very passionate about civil rights. I find great meaning and assistance in prosecuting these types of offenses, because they don't only affect an individual, but they do affect a community on lots of people. So I am very happy working this type of violation. I feel passionate and dedicated to it. This morning, we are going to talk about color of law. And as you may know, what it is anybody that has been given an authority or legal power in an official capacity that they turn around and they're involved in misconduct or even criminal activity while using their authority is what we refer to as color of law. Now, throughout my presentation, we're going to be talking about what it takes to prosecute a case. And then within the presentation, I'm also going to have some poll questions, and I'm going to pose to you some scenarios to see what you would think, who would be responsible, if anybody. So it's a little bit interactive as well. And then I will be closing with some recent statistics and takeaways. So with that in mind, we are going to move forward, and we are going to talk about criminal statutes that will apply if anybody is involved in misconduct or criminal activity, what it would take to prosecute that, or investigate and prosecute that matter. We work closely with the Department of Justice, and then if we can go to the next slide, please. And we have we're all one Department of Justice. We have what we refer to as the main justice. They're in Washington, D.C., and they have a section, the criminal section, that they do nothing but investigate, prosecute civil rights violations. We have also our local United States Attorney's Office here in downtown Tampa, and we work very closely with our local AUSAs, as we refer to them. And we also work with other law enforcement agencies, even though we're the primary agency assigned to investigate color of law violations. And besides the criminal section, there is a civil special litigation unit. So we refer to it as civil rights attorneys. And what they investigate would be patterns of practice, such as maybe an entire agency is involved in excessive use of force or bias policing. So then again, we have two different branches that we could tackle the misconduct. As far as the FBI, our headquarters unit is also for the time being in Washington, D.C., and they help us to provide oversight and support our local offices. We have 56 within the United States. And under the civil rights violations that we investigate, it's hate crimes. And that would be any crime that regular crime, arson, vandalism, damage, murder, kidnapping, etc., that is solely motivated by somebody's bias against race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, place of origin, etc. The reason I have it highlighted in red is because this is our #1 priority. It's because it affects, again, an entire community, group of people. It's not just an individual crime that affects personally, and it's long lasting. The effects of this crime could be a lifelong effects. Next would be color of law, which is what we're discussing today, and then freedom of access to clinic entrances. So we refer to it as FACE Act because you see how long it is. And this pretty much is your abortion clinic type crimes. Nobody can interfere or intimidate anyone either receiving or providing reproductive services. We work closely specifically on this violation with our domestic terrorism squad, especially if there's any type of bombings and etc. Next slide. Why did the FBI become involved in protecting civil rights? And we go back to the 1960s, and there were 3 very significant cases that gave us that authority. And it started with the murder of Medgar Evers. He was the secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi, and he was gunned down in front of his home in 1963. Also, the murder of 3 civil rights workers that had been stopped on a traffic infraction, and thereafter the car was found burnt and the workers were nowhere to be found. Eventually they were found murdered. And also the murder of Viola Liuzzo. She was a female that was helping transport the Selma marchers, and she was also killed. Out of these 3 cases, it turns out that the police, the local police, was actually involved with the Ku Klux Klan, KKK. And also that these cases were not investigated properly or prosecuted successfully. And these cases gave us the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited any discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, sex, etc. Later on, sexual identity. Next slide. And here's just to show you that the FBI's 10 priorities, 1 being defend the United States against terrorist attacks, 2, defend against counterintelligence, 3, cyber crimes, 4, public corruptions. Protecting civil rights is very important to us. It comes at number 5. And that is because if we let it go unchecked, it may root to domestic terrorism. And no one is above or beyond the law. And we adhere rigorous obedience to the Constitution of the United States. Next. And now we're going to go into the statutes, the ones that we will utilize or apply if we're going to investigate and prosecute a color of law case. And these are the 4. We have violation of rights under color of law, civil rights conspiracy, and what we call the cover-up statutes, which is any obstruction of justice or false statements and perjury. Some of the statutes are misdemeanors. However, when we apply conspiracy charges, that will rise to a federal charge. So when we can use it, we will use that one. So I wanted to talk to you about what the statute says for 242. It's archaic language, so when you read it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense until you know what everything means. And what it says is, whoever, under color of any law, willfully subjects any person in any state to the deprivation of any right secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States. So for us to be able to prosecute a case, we'll have to apply the 3 elements that are highlighted in red, and we're going to go over it. And to be able to understand the statute, we do need to know what our rights are, and we will talk about that coming up. And I meant to also mention that color of law is classified under a civil rights violation. But I want to make sure you understand that there's no race involved in this violation, this statute. That there not need to be an element of race if somebody has participated in a criminal activity using their official capacity. So in 242, it makes it a felony. We were talking about before if it would constitute a misdemeanor, but a felony will make it if there is bodily injury or death results, a dangerous weapon was used, an attempt or it was threatened with a weapon, obviously kidnapping or aggravated sexual abuse. And here it highlighted in red is pain, because there need not to be any broken bones, blood, or anything like that to consider injury. The person, if feels any sort of pain, it would be classified as bodily injury. And here the death, if for example, a police officer handcuffs an individual and they were resisting arrest and they used excessive use of force, and if that person ended up dying, even though the officer did not intend for the death to occur, he would still be, or she be, responsible for the death. The statute of limitation is usually 5 years. Of course, unless death results, there is no limitation. Next. And here's the element 1, which is color of law. And here is, how do we know when someone's acting under the color of law? So again, anybody that has been given legal authority to, for example, detain and arrest an individual, use of force in certain situations, which we will talk about later, search and seize property, also to bring criminal charges. This would be sort of like a prosecutor, judges are also under this color of law, police officers, probation officers, correction officers, etc. Next. And what we have to consider to see if they are acting under color of law is, are they on duty at the time of the conduct? Were they wearing their uniform? Were they using their official equipment? Were they displaying a badge? Were they self-identifying as an officer? Were they issuing commands? So these are all things that we look at to consider if they're under the color of law. So here's our first scenario. I'm going to read it, and if you could please, the poll will pop up and we'll be able to answer that question. What do you think of this? An officer finds out that his wife is having an affair. He goes home in the middle of the day, off duty, but he's still in uniform, and he finds his wife with a lover. He then strikes his wife and arrests the lover, falsely claiming the lover assaulted him. Can the officer be prosecuted for acting under the color of law? And if so, for what? The poll has been open. You'll take a few seconds to respond, and we'll discuss the outcome. Okay, we will close the polls at this time. All right, so 23% of you think no, 11% yes on the lover, 0 thought assault on the wife, and 66% think both. So we'll go ahead and close this, and can we move to the next slide to show the yes, so the check mark says the correct answer is B. The reason would be the wife is not necessarily thinking that her husband's on duty because she's used to seeing him at home, changing into the uniform, coming home, taking it off. So he's not necessarily striking her because, you know, of his official capacity, just probably upset, you know, of the situation. For sure, the lover, because he is falsely claiming a charge. So he's probably writing the report, something that did not happen. Now, necessarily doesn't mean that this officer could not get, you know, prosecuted for a different charge like assault on the wife. So that's why the answer would be B, just on the lover at this time. Next. And here's another scenario. The driver of a car with blue lights in his car grill pulls over a female motorist, shows a badge, then sexually assaults her. Then it turns out he's really not a police officer and purchased the lights on and badge on eBay. Do you think he can be prosecuted for acting under the color of law? We'll open up the polls. And if we're ready, we can close them. So a lot of you think yes, and let's see what the right answer is. The answer is no, because in this situation, the driver of the car was not an actual police officer. He was not given the authority to execute arrests or traffic stops or anything like that. He did not have the authority. So for acting under the color of law, we have to have actual granted authority. And that's why the reason is no. Not to say that he's not going to get prosecuted again for maybe rape or assault or, by the state. Another scenario, a corrections officer is angry with inmate Joe. He then gives cigarettes to inmate Tom to beat up Joe. Tom then assaults Joe that evening when the CO is not in the jail. Who can be prosecuted for acting under the color of law? All right. And if we've had enough time, we'll go ahead and close the poll. So the CO only 66%. Tom only was 3%, the CO and Tom 23%, and neither 8%. All right, so the right answer is the CO and Tom. Actually, that's not correct. It would be the CO. Apologize about that. And that's because even though the corrections officer did not, was not there at the time that that they beat up the inmate, it was because the CO pretty much cloaked Tom to do the action, the criminal activity. And coincidentally, this scenario actually comes from the case in the 1960s that I told you about, the murder of the 3 civil workers. In that case, what had happened is that the police officers provided access to the KKK to kill the workers. So that's why eventually it was successfully prosecuted. And this is an example of when an official can provide cloaking or authority to someone else. Next. Now we're going to go into element 2. And again, we have to have 3 to be able to fully prosecute a case. And this, we're going to talk about willfulness. And willfulness means, or willfully means, that we or someone is acting on purpose. They knew better, they've trained otherwise, and they know better, and they choose to do wrong anyway. It has to be more than intent, more than negligence, more than being poorly trained. And this is why a lot of times it makes our prosecutions very difficult to meet the standard, because how do we know, how are we going to know that they did this on purpose, not because any other means? So how can we prove it? So we look at comments showing a bad motive. Are they retaliating for some reason? The reports gives us a lot of information because nowadays there's so many videos. The incidents most of the time are captured with our surveillance cameras or cell phones, but we usually have video, and then we see the statements that the officers write, and then it doesn't correspond. So this is a good example of a cover-up. And is that person boasting afterwards? Are they bragging on social media? Did they just get trained maybe the week before, the day before, and then they're choosing to do this action the next day? We look at records. Have there been any complaints in the past? And obviously eyewitness testimony. We always try to talk to everybody that was part of the incident or that observed, witnessed the incident, especially from other officers. Next. Element 3, deprivation of rights. So what are our rights? And we have a lot, but the ones that we see mostly when we prosecute cases are these 3. The 4th Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, and an unreasonable or excessive use of force during an arrest is considered a 4th Amendment violation. The 8th Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, which includes abuse of convicted inmates. And the 14th Amendment prohibits deprivation of liberty without due process, which includes someone that has been detained but not yet convicted. So out of all the cases that we investigate, those are the most that we see. Now here's a question for you. Which ones here do you think are protected right? And we'll open up the poll. And if we're ready, if everybody's answered the question, we can go ahead and close it. So 67% think the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. 43% think right to be free from unreasonable force during an arrest. 20% think right to have officers protect and serve. 13% thought right to be free from the use of racial slurs by law enforcement. And 40% thought right to be free from harm while in custody. 12% right to curse at a police officer and not face arrest. Hold on. Okay, the light just went on. Okay, so the A, right to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness, is actually comes from the Declaration of Independence, not from the Constitution. B is protected right. We have the right to be free from unreasonable force during an arrest. The right to have officers protect and serve, that is usually found as a motto in the police, the marked units. And the right to be free from the use of racial slurs by law enforcement. It's not a constitutional right. It's probably more of a First Amendment type situation. It's probably not a good thing to practice as a police officer, and I'm sure the agency, could result in disciplinary action, maybe even termination, but it's not technically protected by the Constitution. While right to be free from harm while in custody is most definitely a protected right. And the right to curse at a police officer and not face arrest. That also sort of goes back to like a First Amendment. A person can say whatever they want really, as long as they're not communicating a threat. So in this situation, if that person is solely arrested for cursing, that would be a violation of a protected right. Next. So under color of law, what is prohibited? Excessive use of force during an arrest or in jail, sexual assault, provision of false evidence. If someone is making up evidence to put someone in jail, is definitely prohibited. If we can go back, please. And And then force is unconstitutional. We have been provided with authority to use excessive use of force, but if we abuse that and it is considered unreasonable, and it's a Fourth Amendment violation. And we get this, this was an outcome from a case back in the 1980s. It was Graham versus Connor. And what happened is Mr. Graham was suffering from a diabetic issue, and he wanted to go to a gas station to get some sort of sugar for his medical issue. And he was very annoyed because he went inside and there was a long line. And so he just like left and, you know, very hurriedly. So Officer Connor saw this and he just thought there was something, you know, egregious, something happening. They didn't feel right. So Officer Connor conducts a stop of Mr. Graham, a traffic stop. And then Mr. Graham was not being cooperative, but it could have been because he was suffering from his medical issues. And ultimately, excessive use of force took place. He suffered some broken bones, etc. And Mr. Graham then sued, and this case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And as a result of this case, we have, you know, what is reasonable during an arrest, or, you know, as far as excessive use of force. And it's all from this case. What would a reasonable officer do in the same situation as how we sort of judge what was reasonable and not. Next. And deadly force during an arrest, yes, we have been granted that authority. But the question is always, for excessive use of force, was it reasonable? Was deadly, I mean, not excessive, just force. When is deadly force reasonable? And that would be when a suspect poses a threat of death or serious harm, not only to others, but to themselves. When the suspect is dangerous and is, you know, fleeing felon, then we have that authority to, we have the deadly force authority. And we have to provide a warning if at all feasible. And this also comes from a case back in the 80s that went all the way to the Supreme Court, which was the Tennessee versus Garner. And what happened is there was a suspect that was in the middle of committing a crime, and he was stopped, but the suspect fled and did not listen to commands. And the officer ended up shooting him, knowing that the suspect was not armed. And use deadly force. So the outcome is that, you know, when can we use deadly force? And again, is when they pose a threat to themselves or to others. And if we know that they're dangerous, that committed, for example, killings and kidnappings, and then all of a sudden we know this, have a weapon and they run, then we have authority to use deadly force. Next. Sexual assault, obviously not prohibited under color of law. Non-consensual sexual conduct is unconstitutional. And what we consider non-consensual would be forcible or the result of coercion. The cases that we see, it usually involve coercion. And many cases involve, believe it or not, non-law enforcement, police officers. We see judges. There was a judge, I think it was in Texas, Judge Lanier, who was a significant case because he was abusing women that had cases for custody with their children. So he was telling them that the women had to submit to him if they wanted to keep their kids. So that was a very egregious case. And we do see not only law enforcement, but judges, prosecutors as well. And of course, coercion, we're going to look at all the events surrounding the event to see what constitutes coercion or forcible. So here's a scenario for you. On 3 occasions, Officer Smith takes 3 different female inmates, Anita, Beth, and Cindy, into a storage room. In each case, they do have sex. Smith tells Anita that if she has sex with him, he will give her cigarettes. She agrees. Smith makes the same offer to inmate Beth, who declines. He then tells Beth that if she does not have sex with him, he will write her up for violating inmate rules of conduct. Cindy and Smith have dated previously, and she considers herself his girlfriend. Has Smith violated any of the inmates listed above civil rights? All right, if we can close the poll. All right, so Beth was at 56%, and that is the correct answer because, if we can go to the next slide, Anita exchanges cigarettes and she agrees, so that it was not coercion. Beth does not agree, and then there was a threat of violating rules of conduct. And Cindy, they were considered, girlfriend, boyfriend. So not to say for a color of law, only Beth would be prosecutable. The other ones, not to say that the corrections facility would, it's a crime under custody to have sex anyway, so it would be dealt differently. Next. False evidence is unconstitutional to deprive a person of liberty based on false evidence. That would mean testifying in court to bring charges or to write reports with false information. Next. Here's a scenario. Officers assault a handcuffed inmate and write the inmate for attacking them. The inmate is found guilty in a prison hearing and forfeits earned good time credits. Is this a constitutional violation? And the answer is yes, absolutely, because they're making, he's handcuffed and, he didn't attack them, so correct. It is a constitutional violation. Next. Theft. The theft of property is unconstitutional, especially during an arrest. And we see this a lot with traffic stops, when, police officers, whoever it is, law enforcement, either takes items or plants evidence, etc. Next. This is a case in Frio, Texas, where law enforcement were indicted for burglaries. They were responding to burglar alarms, and eventually they ended up themselves stealing different items. Okay, denial of care. I'm going a little bit fast. Apparently I'm running out of time, so I apologize for going a little bit faster than I should. And denial of care, it is unconstitutional to deny anyone of medical care but the person needs to appreciate the need that the person needs medical care. And then the officer must willfully or on purpose not give them the medical attention needed. Next. Okay, a scenario here during booking, a prisoner complains he needs his diabetes medications. The booking officer has the nurse evaluate the prisoner. She looks him over per procedure and says the prisoner does not have a need for medication. Later, the prisoner has convulsion and dies. Do you think anybody can be prosecuted for violating their rights? All right, we'll close it. And so the nurse, people thought 35%, both 28, neither 28, and the officer is 9. The correct answer is neither. Not the officer, because he actually did take the inmate to the nurse. And then the nurse, we don't have enough information to know that she did it on, like she was maybe negligent, or she's maybe a bad nurse, or she didn't care, but we don't know that she did it on purpose. It might be different if this was actually her ex-husband who she's really upset with, but based on this scenario, it's neither. Next. And another denial of medical care scenario, after throwing a resistant prisoner to the ground, Border Patrol agent knees him in the back. The prisoner then complains that he cannot feel his legs. The officer then, the individual is lying, so when the transfer van arrives, the officer puts the prisoner in the van and administers pepper spray just to see if the prisoner is lying. The prisoner doesn't move. The officer then drives the prisoner to the station that's actually 2.5 hours away, only for his convenience because there's another one closer. It turns out that the prisoner is paralyzed. Do you think that any of his civil rights violations have been committed? All right, and we can go ahead and close the poll if we're ready. The answer is yes on medical care, 86%, yes on pepper spray, 50%, yes on the takedown, no, 22%. So B and C are the answers because pepper spray is not intended to use to see someone to cause a reaction. And yes on the medical care because the officer could have taken this prisoner closer to provide that medical care. It maybe could have helped them not be paralyzed, we don't know. Next. Failure to keep from harm. It is unconstitutional to purposely let someone in custody get injured, whether it's themselves, self-inflicted injuries, others, or from correction officers. Next. Scenario here, during booking at the police station, Officer Smith gets frustrated when handcuffing a prisoner, Allen, and he refuses to answer booking questions. Allen and Smith hurl insults at each other. Smith takes out his baton and is about to strike Allen. But then Officer Jones intervenes and no blow is struck. Do you not think that any of the civil rights violations have been committed? And if so, by whom? All right, if we close the poll and show the answers. When I'm ready. No on 73%, and that is the correct answer. And this is because no crime actually happened, thanks to Officer Jones, who intervened and prevented that from happening. Not to say that it couldn't be addressed as a disciplinary issue or by other means. Next. And closing now, I'm just going to leave you with some statistics, recent statistics and procedures. Part of the FBI's approach to color of law is not only proactive, meaning liaison and training. You can request training either on hate crimes, color of law, anything like that. Will come out either by Zoom or in person to talk to your squads or units, etc. But we're also reactive. I also not only do we train, but we actively investigate events and allegations. There is no formal complaint process. We get complaints by internet, by phone. We proactively look at the news to see what's happening in our areas, and we proactively inquire about certain incidents that happen. We get referrals from other police departments. Their own agencies sometimes ask us to investigate. And it could result in an FBI investigation and ultimately a grand jury investigation. We receive, as you can imagine, complaints daily. We could be, and we usually try to use obviously the least intrusive methods to evaluate an allegation. And we certainly always confer with the United States Attorney's Office and Department of Justice. We have, just to give you an idea, 330 million people, documented and undocumented, 18,000 law enforcement agencies, 800,000 sworn police officers, 40 million people have contact with law enforcement each year. That's a lot of people. And just to show you that use of force in 800,000 instances was only at 2%. So, and as of June 2020, we've had 111 federal convictions. Out of all the cases pending, 838, 64% right now are color of law related cases, 2% are the FACE Act, while 34% are hate crimes. And just because we can prosecute a case federally doesn't mean that state or local, it can bring charges. Internal discipline can be conducted. Somebody could file a civil lawsuit, and it could also be referred to that special litigation unit I mentioned earlier. Next. And just the takeaways, the federal jurisdiction is obviously based on the Constitution, which is, as you know, very broad. We can only prosecute willful violations. We don't prosecute mistakes or errors. And cover-ups and lies make it worse. And training and internal discipline are critical to maintaining law enforcement professionalism. It's should be our responsibility to do the right thing. Next. And here is my information. I am here in Tampa, and I have also listed the United States Attorney's Office here in Tampa, and that is their phone number. And thank you very much for your participation. And I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Susanna. You do an excellent job in getting the message out about color of law. That's very important. You know, someone in our comment section said something about education as part of the prerequisite on building better trust in the community. And you do an excellent job in educating our current law enforcement and criminal justice practitioners about color of law. It's very, very important. That's one thing we can make a difference on. And I appreciate your service to the communities.
Thank you.
When we talk about building trust and we talk about the importance of trustworthiness, we know there's a lot of different components. We know that the character and the competency of people is very important also. Next slide, please. We know that there's 13 behavioral aspects of high trust in our identifiable leaders that we would like to present to you, positive behaviors of that character. To be able to talk straight to people and let them know about things that are factual. Demonstrate respect to people. That's universal. People like folks that give respect to them. Create transparency. In many agencies, as we look across Florida and look across the nation, they're doing all the positive things of creating the transparency and demonstrating the positive leadership that we need in communities. When you make a mistake, because we talk about the human factor, we know that just admit, I'm human, I made a mistake. And you right those wrongs. Apologize quickly. Show loyalty. When you have those relationships and you go out and you work with people, give the credit to others. Speak about people as if they were present, standing right next to you. Acknowledge those great successes. Next, please. Galila, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. And we'll move forward with these. Deliver results, get things done, get the right things done, and accomplish what we are hired to do. It's very important. We are always looking to improve ourselves, to determine how we can grow. We're always looking to increase our capabilities. We're always learning, constantly learning in this system. It's so important that we continue to do that. We're confronting reality, tackling issues head on, even those that are considered undiscussables. Not too long ago, a lot of these topics that we are addressing were considered undiscussables. But now we commend you all on taking that first step and engaging in these conversations. We also want to clarify what our expectations are. This is again returning to those tenets of procedural justice. Disclose and reveal expectations. We want to be transparent. We need to be clear. Practice accountability. Take responsibility for results, not only for ourselves, but in our agencies. We've got to practice accountability. Next slide, please. Always remember to listen first. Take the time to listen, hear what our staff and our workers, our community, what they are saying, what they are experiencing. Take the time to understand. Keep your commitments. That is huge when it comes to building the legitimacy of our agencies and our organizations. Say what you're going to do and actually do it. And then do not forget to extend trust. Demonstrate propensity to trust, extended to those who have earned it, extended conditionally to those who are working towards earning it. Don't withhold trust because there's risk involved. And on that note, I want to return back to the story that we mentioned earlier with the gentleman who wanted to give back to the community. And we saw some of your comments in the chat. He wanted to work with young people in the community. And because of his criminal history, we faced a lot of brick walls, a lot of barriers were put up. We received information from folks saying, scared straight doesn't work. We can't do this. He's got a criminal background. How are we going to make this happen? But through consistency and working through that team, the probation officer, the entire reentry team pulled together and built on those relationships that we had in the community. And a gym said, yes, I will allow this. I will let this gentleman speak to my youth. And he thought outside of the box. He said, I'm going to talk to the parents, because he had that rapport with the parents. And I'm going to let them know that this gentleman is going to share with them some stuff that's going to help to change the trajectory of their lives. And they were able to do that. And it was a win-win situation. And again, it was built on that entire team extending trust, taking risk, and thinking outside of the box. Next slide, please.
You know, one of the things is we're always looking to elevate the criminal justice field and to elevate and do things that is going to be critical in serving our communities. What are your concerns for the future regarding criminal justice? Please take a moment and enter your answers in the chat box. And while you're entering those answers, I want you to also think about the responsibility that we have as criminal justice practitioners, the responsibility we have of serving people. I want you to also think about how you, from the position that you're in, can do something to contribute to make a difference in your community within the next 6 months. One thing. Write that one thing down for yourself, and this is a self-reflection. In 6 months, on March 25th, pull that piece of paper out of your desk or wherever you secure it at and look at it to see if you accomplish your self-imposed goal of making a difference. Each of you that's on this call today are difference makers, and we do that every day, day in and day out. I hold you guys in high esteem because you are difference makers in your communities. You're doing the things such as coaching Little League or doing some other things. When we work in these communities, we ask the questions, what do they see when they see you? You're in that police car, you coming out as that authority figure. Can you make a difference? I used to supervise a group of officers that were in a housing complex. And I used to tell them every day, say, hey, we've got to be mindful that this is unusual. And they're like, what you talking about? I say it's unusual to see a police cruiser or police officers walking in your neighborhood every day. I wonder how much trauma we create just by mere presence. I understand also in some communities it's a necessity, but we've got to balance that. What do you see when you see them? Do you see the folks that grow up that you inspired as a Little League coach, and they grow up and they're engineers or they're contributing to society in a very positive way? What do you see in them? Next slide, please. We thank you on behalf of the United States Attorney's Office and our U.S. Attorney Maria Chapo Lopez. Our information is on the slide in front of you. Please, if any way we can help you out, collaborate with you on any events, please reach out to us. Kalila is going to comment about some of the responses from earlier.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Susanna, for all of that great information. Also, if you guys got a chance to take a picture of our contact information, when we do these discussions in person, we ask that folks mail us their letter. Now, we know in this virtual world, we don't need to do that. So if you shoot us an email and let us know what it is that you're working on and how we can be of assistance, providing resources, we will definitely reach back out to you. So now we're going to move into the comments and questions. Let's see, a lot of great activity in this chat box going on today. I know we had a question that was out there, Susanna, and I'm not sure what the scenario was, but the question was, if a specific scenario was unconstitutional, then why was there an issue? Let me find that question, Susanna. Great, great information in this chat box going on today. Awesome, wonderful. Yeah, if it was unconstitutional, then why was the individual found guilty? So I'll give you some time to look at that, Susanna, while I continue to look through the chat box. We're gonna get that for you, Natasha.
You know, I see a few comments about change and the opportunity for change. Remember that slide that we reflected upon that say, if it ain't broke, you need to break it. Remember, we're in positions, many of us have been in these positions for 20 or more years. Even if you're new to positions, you bring different ideas, different perspectives. Diversity is a good thing. If everyone thought just alike and came up with the same ideas, we stay stagnant. But if you look at things from different perspectives with your skill sets, with your trainings, with your professional capabilities and abilities, then we reach the ultimate platform of change. Go ahead, Kalila.
Great word. So we have on here, it is imperative that we have open and healthy communication with our communities. Oftentimes we become stagnant in our duties, and we believe that we can learn a lot from those we serve. Absolutely, that's a great comment. Great comment. Change in any system must start at the top with total accountability at every level. Yes, we talked about that. Absolutely, great. The fear nothing will change is real. Some people do not feel that change is going to happen. That is true. Very good comment. We know that we are impacting change, especially with these conversations, right? These conversations, they start, and now we're moving them into some actionable items. So we hope that we can start breaking down that fear. Community safety for all, which involves open communication and policies that involve respect and personal safety for all involved. Procedural justice, internal procedural justice, absolutely. Thank you. Ensuring impartiality, avoiding profiling, and protecting citizens' rights for all. Absolutely. Susanna did a great job at speaking about that. You know, one of the big takeaways from today is learning the different resources out there. Now, I'm not sure if you guys were even aware that Miss Susanna Mapu was available and that she did this type of training, but she is a resource. The FBI is a resource. All of our agencies are resources, and they provide no-cost training, no-cost resources throughout the community. And we talk about collaboration is key. Andrew put that in there, among all branches of government. That's what he's talking about, collaborating across systems, absolutely. We are always not on the same page with restorative justice and rehabilitation as opposed to punishment. Some agencies continue to be too punitive. Absolutely, we talked about that earlier.
Leila, we just got a question in on the chat here from Jeanette Sterling. And I'll let you pose it to one of the panelists.
All right.
How do we move from the conversation to the acting phase of change?
Great question, Janet. We'll direct that to Joe.
You know, one of the things I would say is reach out to people, reach out to your resources that's in your local communities, reach out to those national resources. Remember, you're looking at an opportunity to build relationships. Sometimes those relationships may come in unusual places. You know, I was on a meeting yesterday with the Tampa Bay faith leaders. It covers a 7-county span, and they Zoom every Thursday. From that meeting, we probably have spent off into about 8 different Zoom podcasts, and it makes a difference because those relationships that were created in that incubation of that faith leaders has now spanned into many other avenues with colleges and universities and so on. So you never know where these relationships take you, but I would challenge you to go out and just meet people, talk to people, let them know you're available.
Absolutely. And I'll piggyback off of that, since Joe and I are in the community all the time. Don't be afraid to challenge things. Don't be afraid to take these conversations to the next step, and don't be afraid to work across systems. We couldn't do, again, the work that we do if we only remained in our system. So we work with state, local, and church, faith partners across the district to accomplish that mission. So don't be afraid to do that. Sometimes it may seem outside of the scope of your job. Often, when Joe and I are traveling across the state, we'll stop in and speak to a school. We may not even have that intention for that day, but it actually leads to collaboration and some great practices, some great opportunities. I'm thinking of one in which we're just stopping into a school just to introduce and share information, turned into a mentoring opportunity where we have federal prosecutors now working in that school and impacting at-risk students. So just don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid to engage within the community. Any other questions that we have?
Kalina, actually,
Sure.
Your topic there kind of segues into a question we got.
Great.
And when you were talking about faith-based programs and community programs, are there funding opportunities for community and faith-based programs?
Yes, there are. We always direct all organizations to go to grants.gov, grants.gov. And you can check on grants.gov. There are all kinds of grants that come out. Department of Labor, Department of Justice, all of the federal agencies, and various programs that we work with in the community have received funding for their programs through that site. Great question. Okay,
I've got another question that came in as a direct chat, and I believe this was during early on presentation. The question is, how is it right to curse at an officer reconciled by the offense of disorderly conduct or resisting arrest with that offense?
Can you repeat the question? Oh.
Certainly. How is it right to curse at an officer reconciled that the offense of the offense of disorderly conduct or resisting arrest as the offense?
Yes, saying bad words is protected by the First Amendment. So, I mean, that shouldn't be a violation within itself. It's, you know, free speech at that point. I mean, it's not acceptable, no, but it's not prosecutable either, just on that alone.
And I think we've got to remember, we in the criminal justice service arena, we're held to a higher standard. We've successfully completed background checks, mental aptitude tests, and everything else. And we're the best that society has to offer. So as they say, sticks and stones. But you know, sometimes you have to be the bigger person and realize that people do act out, especially when they're wrong. about something going to jail.
And we have to have thicker skin too. I mean, that comes with the job.
Yes.
Kalila, I've got one here. I'll let you point it in the correct direction or as appropriate. It says, do law enforcement agencies receive color of law training?
I believe the quick answer to that is yes, but Susanna, you want to expound on that? Absolutely.
Yes, we do. We've gone to here locally, Pasco County Sheriff's Office, Hillsborough County. We go to Sarasota. We train the police academies in St. Petersburg College and also in Hillsborough County. So absolutely.
And traditionally, that's about a 2-hour block, right, Susanna?
We could tailor it to whatever amount of time. I do apparently tend to go a little bit over, as we saw today, but yes, we can tailor it to what the needs of the requester is.
Awesome.
And I believe you've covered the follow-up part of that question, and it's who do they contact to set up that to receive the color law training for their agency?
So here in Tampa, you can call like our main number, 813-253-1000, or by email at tampaoutreach@fbi.gov. Or myself, I can also go through and pass on the request to our office, and then if it's approved, which most of the time they are, I will be very happy to provide the training. And I think if we have a few minutes, I did find the question, I think, that was previously unclear. And it was regarding the false evidence scenario. It said officers assault the handcuffed inmate and write the inmate for attacking them. He was handcuffed, but supposedly he was attacking them. The inmate then is found guilty in a prison hearing and forfeits earned good time credits. Is this a constitutional violation? So the yes was to the first part of the question, which is when the officers assault the handcuffed inmate and then they write him for attacking them, that was not true, and it resulted in punishment. So it is a constitutional violation for the officers, not for the inmate. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Susanna.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, we appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, panel. And at this time, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to the president of Florida Association of Community Corrections, Isa Perez Marina. Thank you.
Well, wow. This was a fitting closing to this amazing series. We really do appreciate all the comments that we received in the chat. And we really hope that we provided a balanced and well-rounded series that touched upon the critical issues, inspiring mindful discussions that will continue to improve our field in community corrections. Personally, this has been one of the most rewarding experiences I have had since I've joined this organization, both as a board member, but also as a participant and member. I'm extremely proud of our organization, its diverse group of board of directors, for having the courage to bring this series to life. And I feel very privileged to have heard all of our amazing panelists throughout the series. It's important to recognize, like many of your comments, that the work isn't done. A lot of the feedback we've received is encouraging, and that it reached its intended outcome in terms of inspiring these courageous conversations within our agencies in Florida and developed these meaningful discussions so that we could work together with all of our stakeholders, our workforce, our clients and communities, and meet the goals that everyone is treated equally, fairly, and with respect. The feedback that we've received has also continued to ask, what's next? How can we turn these conversations into actionable steps, and who could help us sift through it all? You know, these are inspiring, meaningful conversations, but now we need some help in everything that it's bringing up. So our pledge to you is to continue. Our board will work and will brainstorm ways that we can assist and help these conversations go further into those steps within our local communities. But in the meantime, like Joe said, I hope that you pledge to continue these dialogues and create actionable steps on your own. And above all, listen and be open to the perspectives and life experiences from those that are different from your own. I cannot effectively close this out without acknowledging and thanking our panelists, Joe Smith, Special Agent Susana Mapu, Kalita Escalera. Thank you to the Federal Bureau of Investigations, to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I also want to acknowledge the esteemed panelists from the first and second part of the series, respectively, Max Epstein, Assistant Chief Probation Officer, Omar Bowler, Corliss Campbell, Dr. Randy Nelson, Dr. Shirley Planton, Ms. Paula Hoisington. In case you missed any of these amazing sessions, check out our YouTube channel. The link is there in the chat. We've really been able to bring amazing, esteemed, and competent panelists, thanks to the Education Committee members. And I want to recognize them before we close: Gary Chappelle, Joe Lipsy, Suzanne Caldell, Assistant Secretary Joe Winkler, Jeff Nichols, Justine Patterson, Tammy Shimming, Lisa Suker, Tony Deaton, Sherry Monroe, Shauna Murray, Linda Brooks, and Kathy Lake. And a big thank you to John McMahon, who worked behind the scene throughout the series, and of course to our Education Committee Chair and Vice President of the Association, Michael Anderson, for his dedication, hard work, and openness. So again, thank you. Thank you to the panel. I hope everyone has an amazing and safe weekend. So until next time, see you soon.